I heard that it was going to be in mostly 2D, but also incorporate some live-action elements, and I was like, okay, this seems similar to the first film. I wonder if it's going to be an actual sequel. I was disappointed to find out that it wouldn't be, but I was never truly concerned until I saw the first poster for the film. A giant SpongeBob whose pants are being... SpongeBob's pants are being pulled off by a crab who's really small, and he's like huge on the beach for some reason, and I started imagining this nightmarish vision of a large SpongeBob walking around on the beach in live action, and just all these awful jokes. He's like, I mean, his pants are being pulled off on the poster. It doesn't seem like a very tasteful film, and I was just scared out of my mind. That's it. That's the second movie. That was just a bunch of cheap real-world gags!
What a rip!
SpongeBob betrayed us!
I'm sorry I started being a stupid fan of SpongeBob in the first place. I'm getting rid of all my SpongeBob stuff. All of it. 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 But then I realized it's a parody of the Coppertone logo. Really?
But that still doesn't mean that he won't actually be that huge size in the film, and they won't make stupid toilet humor jokes all the time. But once the first trailer came out, I noticed something.
I think we have a few minutes before he gets here. Oh, he's right on top of us!
It actually looked pretty good, and I started getting excited for the film, and when it came out, yeah, I genuinely enjoyed it. I couldn't say it was better than the original, but I gave it a stamp of approval. But a lot of my friends didn't feel the same way. They were like, what is this? The first movie was so good. This movie has no story. You're Mr. Story. Why are you liking this? Now, to give you an idea of who I am, I consider myself a very plot-oriented individual. Story is the most important part of a film to me. So if the story isn't good, I just won't enjoy the film. And yet, despite the fact that this film has a scattered story, I found myself enjoying the series of non-sequiturs it provided, and I found myself questioning why. Why did I like it? Well, maybe the director can tell me.
Couldn't wait to get involved because it just feels like something completely different.
Now, is the new SpongeBob movie something completely different? Yes and no. Let's look at the setup of this film. We begin above water in live action, following a pirate adventure that at first seems serious but quickly turns goofy. Aboard the pirate ship, we are treated to a diegetic version of the SpongeBob theme song, and our movie begins. We get an idea of SpongeBob's general routine with a specific emphasis on his fry cook job at the Krusty Krab. We are told of Plankton's ambitions to attain the secret formula to the Krabby Patty, something he will actually get his stubby little paws on in the film. SpongeBob then goes on a big adventure with one other character looking for a single object that will save the town, which has essentially become an apocalyptic cesspool due to the misuse of the formula. Eventually, the journey takes our heroes up to the surface, where they find what they were looking for and return home, having saved the day. Sounds a tad bit familiar.
We said, let's try to bring as much new stuff to everything. Showing Bikini Bottom in a post-apocalyptic setting, that was all new.
Well, no, but it was an element more focused on.
The element where SpongeBob and his friends come up into our world is much more of a big deal in this movie than it was in the last one.
Yeah, there we go. Now that's the best way of putting it, really. Oh, thanks, Tom. Unlike the back of the DVD Blu-ray case, which has the audacity to claim this is the first time SpongeBob has gone up to the surface, no joke. The first line of the synopsis reads, "On a mission to save his world, SpongeBob SquarePants is headed to Mars for the first time ever."
Steven, are you telling lies?
Tom Kenny is right, though. The live-action element is a bigger deal in this film, but not nearly as much as the marketing and the title would suggest. Our heroes don't come flying onto the surface in their heavily advertised CG forms until the 1 hour mark in this 1.5 hour film including credits. And their superhero forms, geez, that's basically how they appear on every single piece of promotional art, and you know how long they are in the movie? Approximately 13 minutes. What draws me to this film, though, is how it made SpongeBob genuinely crazy again. I mean, the very theme song of the show promises nautical nonsense, and that's what the show delivered. There's an anthropomorphic sea sponge who looks like a kitchen sponge that lives in a tropical plant with his pet snail who meows like a cat next to an octopus that has squid in his name for some reason, who lives in a giant Easter Island head and a starfish that literally lives under a rock. I think we all forget just how ridiculous this concept is. Because, 1, we've become desensitized to it after all these years, and 2, we were introduced to it at a young age, before we had a full understanding of how the world really works, and we're generally more accepting of insanity when we're children. Children are crazy. This is a weird movie, not just for the uninitiated, but for someone who's been a SpongeBob fan basically all his life, and finds the premise kind of normal at this point. It feels fresh, even though, yes, it does borrow general ideas from the first film, and a handful of episodes as well. I think the episodes that the movie borrows most from are probably Fun, SB-129, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5, Plankton, and even a little bit of The Secret Box.
The idea that SpongeBob and Plankton have to team up is something that we haven't seen before.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, that hasn't really been done before either.
You still shouldn't be too proud of yourselves, though.
When we made the first movie, you know, it was simply a 2D animated movie. It was sort of a bigger story from what we'd been doing on the TV show, with a little bit of live action, and then it became clear once we got started in this that it was going to be a much larger movie.
Stop deprecating a film whose sequel does not even attempt to match the emotional gravitas of the intended finale of your series. It's clearly not a sequel since there's no Krusty Krab 2 or Plankton being in jail or SpongeBob now being a man and manager, so us fans are going to see it as a prequel. We even get a little tease of Plankton saying that with the formula he could rule the world, something that doesn't come up in the show, but of course serves as the plot for the original film. And I think it's interesting that this film has a message that directly contrasts that of the original. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie is about being in touch with your childish side, but mainly proving yourself and moving on to the next stage of your life, when the big picture starts to become more clear. This film is about not being able to escape the status quo, the carefree, crazy norm. In fact, having to adhere to the status quo, since the fate of the world hangs in the balance if something changes. It's the insanity of childhood. Sponge Out of Water is about being a kid. SpongeBob SquarePants movie is about being a man, so naturally, they have very different tones. What else does this movie have to its advantage? The return of almighty creator Steven Hillenburg, who we haven't had in a meaningful production role since, well, the last movie. In this interview Tom Kenny did a while back, he actually talked about how the studio wanted to do another film for quite some time, but Hillenburg wasn't too keen on the idea until he came up with the right story.
You know, the first one was years ago. You know, it did well. And, but Steve Hillenburg, much to the consternation of, executives, was not ready to make another SpongeBob movie. Just didn't think that he had a story that warranted the longer running time and all that. And, you got to know Steve Hillenburg. He doesn't think like anybody else in show business. Even when he had no money, he didn't care about money. You know what I mean? So, the integrity of the product is so important to him, so he didn't want to do another movie for no reason, and so years later he said, okay, I got a story that I think is worth spending 90 minutes on, and he pitched it to Nickelodeon.
So that's reassuring and really great to hear, and you definitely feel the charm and wit of the original series come through. Less so in the live action bits, however. When you hear him talk about those parts, you kind of get the impression he isn't all that thrilled about it either.
We decided that SpongeBob and his friends would have to save the town.
It comes across as kind of a big studio decision that they just had to work with. I get the impression that they actually compromised to make the 2D film they wanted to make, but haven't marketed like the Smurfs / Alvin and the Chipmunks, whatever the studio execs were hoping for.
We are doing 2D animation.
I feel tingly.
But when the characters come to the surface, they're converted into CG.
In that clip right there, he's assuring us, yes, we do get 2D animation, and then they're converted to CG. Yay, look how excited he is. Oh my gosh, he's gonna burst. Oh, Steven. So let's start looking at the actual film from the beginning. we dramatically zoom across the ocean, only to humorously land on the image of that famous SpongeBob island complete with musical accompaniment. Enter Burger Beard, portrayed by Antonio Banderas, who is basically the only celebrity you see in this movie. There's a very brief and welcome cameo by esteemed actor Tim Conway, who you might also recognize as Barnacle Boy.
You got any sevens?
But that's it. This movie really focuses on the characters from the original series, which is just great, and distinguishes it from such cinematic outings as The Smurfs and The Smurfs 2. But how does Banderas fare in the film? I'll get to that in a minute. So we have Burger Beard retrieving a book from the skeleton, which is actually exactly what he was searching for. Yeah, not looking for treasure, just this book. Interesting. But then the skeleton comes to life and a cocky Burger Beard taunts him, only to be cartoonishly punched through the air all the way back onto his ship. Now, if you recall the Patchy the Pirate segments from SpongeBob TV specials, you'll know that Patchy was also prone to flying around in ridiculous comic nature. However, the payoff to this bit in particular, that the guy who is confident that he'll win the fight loses the fight, is pretty predictable, and I realize this is a comedy, but you still want your antagonist to be kind of threatening, right? At least in the beginning? I mean, look at Plankton, King Neptune, and Dennis from the first movie. They all have their comedic moments, sure, but they pose legitimate threats to our heroes. This is the introduction to really the sole villain of the film, and he's already been established as pathetic in his attempt to ward off a rotting corpse.
Is that all you got?
Then again, you named this character Burger Beard, so maybe you didn't want me to take him seriously at all. So you probably think that I don't enjoy Antonio Banderas' performance in this film. Well, you'd be wrong about that, actually. He always appears fully engaged, he has a strong physical comedy presence, a really funny voice, he's hamming it up, and he just seems like he's having the time of his life on screen. A lot of the time when you bring on celebrities to this kind of project, you get the vibe that they're condescending the material. Or they just really don't care.
Seriously? The no-fly list? I thought you guys were mature enough to take care of yourselves.
Seriously? The no-fly list? I can just feel the script slightly off camera that Jason Lee is reading from because he didn't read the script until just now when he's saying the line in the actual take that ended up in the film. But Banderas plays the part well. He even made me laugh out loud in the theater pretty early on when he was playing off the seagull characters.
Okay, start reading.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that I hated them with every fiber of my being, the fact that he detested them outright made me feel someone shared my pain. And that was comforting. What's so horrible about these seagulls, you ask? Well, it seems like the only reason they're in the movie is to provide cheap, childish CGI entertainment to the part of the audience that can't wait until later on in the film when that stuff comes into the forefront. They recite toilet humor and just provide general annoyance to anyone who is a rational-minded human being in the theater. Are they at least plot relevant? Not even a bit. At a certain point in the film, Burger Beard finally scares them off, and once our main characters come ashore, the seagulls are barely seen again until the rap battle. We'll get to that later. You would think maybe they'd at least help point our heroes toward where Burger Beard's food truck was, since they're angry about being sent away and were established early on as enjoying SpongeBob. After all, they sing the theme song, which... No, wait a minute. How do they know the SpongeBob SquarePants theme song? In the first movie, the pirates sing it as a sea sandy upon acquiring tickets to the movie, which we see them watching in the theater. Like, in their world, SpongeBob isn't real, similar to how he isn't real in the Patchy segments, despite the fact that SpongeBob comes ashore in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, he's still just being watched on a big old movie screen. But in this one, they are aware of the theme song from his TV show, but he also really exists in that very same world. I guess this has something to do with the book bringing the characters to life? But then why don't any of the humans recognize the characters from the famous TV show?
SpongeBob! Huh?
Oh, so the baby knew who he was, but none of the other children they encounter. How does this book work again? SpongeBob's story is shown to exist in the book before he tampered with it, but Bikini Bottom would have never gone apocalyptic if he didn't edit it so that he could have the formula. They don't ever really take the time to properly explain the goal of Burger Beard. I mean, the beginning of the trailer made it seem pretty clear.
With this magic book, every evil plan I write comes true. But to harness his power, I need the final page that is protected deep below the surface by one legendary hero.
Cut to SpongeBob. Oh, he's not the hero. Oh.
But in the movie, he just wanted the formula so he could make Krabby Patties and have that food truck business.
My very own food truck!
The formula was intended to be the final page of the book that would make the magic work. I guess they abandoned that direction in the final film, and instead we see the formula magically disappearing, with no explanation at that time, and no confirmation that Burger Beard rewrote the story. It's not until very late in the film when Burger Beard informs the characters that he rewrote the story. The only hint we get earlier is when he writes the end on a page, and tries to claim to the seagulls there's nothing more to this story. I'm just saying, if you hadn't seen any promotional materials before seeing the film, you might find yourself not only scratching your head and saying, I thought this was like live action / CG, but also pretty confused as to what exactly in the world caused the inciting incident of the entire motion picture you're viewing. What in the world? Heck, it's not even in SpongeBob's world. Or wait, I guess it is, because he exists in the same plane of reality as Burger Beard and now, you might say that the first film had logical issues, but remember, basically the entire movie exists as a movie within the movie, so it's perfectly reasonable to conclude that some things in a movie wouldn't make any sense. In fact, as a result, you could argue that the SpongeBob SquarePants movie is one of the most realistic films of our generation. It's about a group of people who are under the impression that they're pirates, going into a movie theater and seeing the SpongeBob movie. Pretty simple. Could happen in real life. You could have people crazy enough to, dress up as pirates, commit to that idea. All kidding aside, though. Of course a movie about SpongeBob doesn't really need to make sense. But just try to explain what you're going for. Like when SpongeBob tells Burger Beard about the benevolent dolphin who granted them the ability to breathe oxygen, which I'm not even questioning that. Burger Beard remarks that this isn't in the book. Now, let's forget for a moment that the original story must not have been anything like what we see in the movie, since the formula doesn't magically disappear until Burger Beard changes it. What does it mean that they met a dolphin, but in the original book they didn't meet that dolphin? SpongeBob later physically rewrites the story, but you're telling me he changed it before he put the quill to the paper? Are the characters becoming self-aware and going against the fate that was transcribed to them? Did the disruption of the status quo by Burger Beard cause everything to spin out of control, including fate? Wait a minute. That, I might be onto something. Okay, we'll get back to that at the end, alright? Alright. So we are introduced to the status quo of the series in a little montage of sorts set to narration by Burger Beard. Now, I'm not sure if the filmmakers always had this montage, or if it was meant to replace Thank Goss It's Monday, an opening song that was apparently dropped due to poor reaction from test screenings. Maybe it set up false expectations for the film to be a musical, which it isn't.
Sing with me, Gary!
Well, however it got cut, I must say that it really captured the upbeat and optimistic nature of both the series and its titular character. Reinstating it, in my own personal fan edit of the film, was a no-brainer. However, even if this montage was intended as a replacement for the great song that I feel they should have kept, I still really like it. It's cool to see the mechanics of the show be explained to a new generation, and what could have felt like obligatory exposition instead is legitimately hilarious.
Why did they eat them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, despite the doctor's warnings?
He'll be gone in a week.
Oh, Carol.
Plus, mainstream, high-budget theatrical 2D animation. It's good to see you again. This 2D is a 10 out of 10 with its vibrant colors and precise detail that certainly live up to the ramped-up animation of the original film. As soon as this popped up on screen, I knew I was in for a visual treat, at least. You might also notice SpongeBob's voice is back to normal. What am I talking about, you ask? Well, young one, ever since the first movie, SpongeBob's voice got really pitched up. Yeah, it wasn't always like this.
Why don't you just get a new one stitched onto your face?
It used to be like this.
Wait a minute. I'm forgetting the words of Grandpa SquarePants.
And let me tell you, this did no favors to the general declining quality of the series, making it feel less accessible to an older audience that would never tolerate such a grating voice for the main character. Obviously, this is not the fault of legendary voice actor Tom Kenny, and instead someone at Nickelodeon who decided that the show needed to be more repulsive to the human ear. So, our first accent set piece is something that would feel right at home in the show, Plankton attempting to steal the Krabby Patty formula, but, fittingly enough, on a larger scale than usual. It's an all-out food fight, complete with amusing wordplay,
Unleash the condiments!
With relish.
and callbacks to the series.
Finland.
You okay, Patrick?
Finland!
It's creative and filled with energy, but just when it looks like Plankton has failed yet again, he ends up in the very safe where the formula resides. SpongeBob tries to grab it out of Plankton's hands, which, wow, we knew he wasn't strong, but only for it to mysteriously vanish into thin air. Mr. Krabs assumes that Plankton has taken it, and SpongeBob attempts to defend him, but soon unintentionally subjects him to torture by way of his laugh. A nice self-deprecating joke about, as I just mentioned before, how annoying they made the character over the years, particularly that laugh. But wow, do they really get SpongeBob's character right in this film?
You're okay in my book.
Seasons 4 and onward really started to strip the character of any maturity that he had. He used to be fairly rational, at least compared to Patrick.
Patrick, that's a terrible idea.
But at a certain point, they decide to make them both blubbering idiot babies, with the only distinguishing characteristic between them is that SpongeBob is the one with the high voice. But look at him in this movie.
Maybe we should have picked a better superpower for you, Patrick.
He manages to rescue Plankton from an unjust fate at the hands of an angry mob. Despite his lifelong allegiance to his boss, he's willing to stand up for what's right and intervene before things get dirty. He's not the only character they do justice to either. Mr. Krabs is not just all about money in his portrayal here like later seasons want us to believe. He tries to help what he recognized to be
A giant hairy porpoise!
back into the water. Yes, he is adamant about retrieving the Krabby Patty formula, but it's actually for the well-being of society, believe it or not. And even though I think it's a subtle touch, I think it makes the character a lot more likable.
Dark times are ahead. Dark times indeed.
And man, the original score is just fantastic in this film. That's film composer John Debney, who also worked on such films as The Emperor's New Groove, The Passion of the Christ, Elf, and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man sequels. Clearly a pretty diverse film composer, and having such a seasoned composer does a great deal to enrich the cinematic experience overall. Unfortunately, the film then cuts back to the seagulls, who flip out as Burger Beard claims the story he's been reading them ends with Bikini Bottom having become an apocalyptic cesspool. I guess that didn't align exactly with their headcanons. We do get a charming fake credits bit, which is promptly interrupted by the seagulls threatening to... You know, the first film had a fair bit of toilet humor, arguably more than the show ever did, but it didn't include a set of characters practically devoted to providing it. Meanwhile, the situation in Bikini Bottom continues to get worse. We get a cameo from newscaster Perch Perkins, a character that originated in the first film, and even an appearance from the realistic fish head. With these guys and the doctor from earlier, they're really making some nice subtle nods to the show, and actually giving these characters the proper coloring and voice. Yeah, sometimes they say Old Man Jenkins is a different guy, or they made Perch Perkins orange in the show, or the doctor, but everyone's right in their portrayal here. I don't think they've portrayed these characters like this since very early on in the show, for some reason. And while these moments don't do much to advance the story aside from depict more and more characters beginning to go mad, they are short and honestly pretty funny.
What is the secret ingredient in Krabby Patties anyway?
It's love! The secret ingredient is love!
And they really make me feel like whoever was working on this either buckled down and did their research on all the little background characters, or you brought back the people who created them in the first place, and they obviously knew what they were doing. SpongeBob then attempts to recruit a team of friends in hopes of finding the formula. Obviously, since Mr. Krabs is under the impression that SpongeBob stabbed him in the back, he doesn't try to go after him. But the fact that SpongeBob completely glosses over Squidward is quite humorous. They don't even make a joke out of it. He just never tries to get Squidward at all. But let's break down each part of this sequence. We begin with, in my opinion, easily the worst of the three, the Patrick bit. Patrick is a character who has, in post-movie seasons, suffered bouts of jerkiness and moments of over-the-top stupidity to the point it wasn't funny anymore. I think it's either him or Mr. Krabs who have suffered the most in their more recent portrayals, though, honestly, a lot of the characters have become far worse, so it's a tight race. And while I did get a chuckle out of the secret password bit, and even laughed upon first seeing this,
What exactly does this clown bring to the TM?
He brings loyalty, Plankton. Loyalty. Isn't that right, Patrick?
Yeah, loyalty. I've got SpongeBob!
this one scene is pretty damaging to his overall portrayal in the film. I understand they needed to write Patrick out of the adventure, but they could have found a way to do this that wasn't so insulting to the character. In the first film, Patrick was furious when SpongeBob didn't receive his managerial promotion, and agreed to join SpongeBob on the life-threatening journey to Cell City, despite not having anything to gain himself. Here he tries to stop him before he can walk 10 steps from his house, because he wants to eat food. Though I suppose it makes enough sense that the one main character who has a reduced part in the film comes across a lot worse. And to be fair, all of the characters have gone insane ever since the Krabby Patty formula has disappeared. So I understand it's not that they just ruined Patrick's character, because aside from the apocalyptic segment of the film, they get him just fine, making this easily his worst appearance. Next up is Sandy's scene. There are a lot of things I like about it. It's really awesome to see the tree dome on the big screen for the first time, especially this beautifully stylized, insane version of it. It's also great to see Sandy's role as a scientist downplayed. Again, in the original seasons, besides her having the tree dome in the first place, the only episode science really came into play was Sandy's rocket, way back in season 1. And I think the idea of her becoming a conspiracy theorist based on seeing a giant page from the book with the words "The End" on it fall down in front of her is a really clever one. A commonplace object from the human world landing in Bikini Bottom, where it is huge and has a dangerous effect on townsfolk, kinda reminds me of Frankendoodle. Classic episode. Really, the only thing that bothers me about this scene is it being the second in a repetitive 3-part series of sequences in which SpongeBob attempts to get help from a friend to no avail. This is when you realize exactly what it is the film is doing in this part, and you figure out the movie is not going to surprise you until this section is over. If there's a trope that needs to go away in animation and kids media, it's the whole "let's give each character the same type of scene all in a row" trope. Once you realize it's happening, even if the scenes are funny, you can't help but feel like your time is being wasted, because they're kind of doing the same thing over and over again. Heck, as great as MLP can be, sometimes they fall victim to this trope as well, and it's kind of grating to watch. But then comes Gary's scene, which really takes a strange direction. Apparently during the post-apocalypse, Gary has become regarded as the king of snails, a comedic beat made all the funnier by the brilliant animation and tribal instrumentals. It's a nice showcase for a rather minor character in the SpongeBob universe in the grand scheme of things. They didn't need to give Gary a moment to shine, but it's really nice that they did. And it shows a lot of respect to the original material. Having given up on recruiting teammates for the day, SpongeBob laments the state of his beloved town.
Everything we know and love has been destroyed.
Plankton appears to comfort him and then lull him to sleep, and suddenly the movie becomes full out, well, Plankton. And I mean Plankton the episode, as in the character's first appearance in the show, in which he attempted to control SpongeBob's brain. This time, however, he actually ventures inside of SpongeBob's mind, which brings us into one of the funniest, most creative sequences in the film. We see everything from cupcakes playing patty cake to an overt signing reference with twin popsicles. This is then followed by an equally funny and downright bizarre exchange between SpongeBob and Plankton, in which SpongeBob accuses Plankton of being in his head.
What were you doing in there?
It's just the kind of conversation that I can't imagine hearing anywhere outside of SpongeBob. Plankton then says that he was under the impression SpongeBob was lying to him when he said he couldn't recall the formula. SpongeBob is offended to hear that Plankton believed he was lying, but Plankton explains he just assumes that everyone is lying.
That is a horrible way to live your life.
Whatever.
It really is pretty cool to see SpongeBob and Plankton arguing about their individual ideologies. I wish we could have seen even more of that in the film. The interaction between SpongeBob and Plankton is, at its base, more interesting material for a feature film than, well, SpongeBob and Patrick. Think about it. SpongeBob and Patrick is a pairing we see very frequently in the show, and regardless, it's two characters who are fairly in sync, even after the movie when they became really kind of the same character. And seeing SpongeBob and Plankton work together really is rare. When have we ever seen that in the show? FUN? The fun episode? Now, speaking of that episode, we get a duet between SpongeBob and Plankton in which SpongeBob attempts to explain a fundamental, well-intentioned concept to Plankton, who has never even heard of it. Yup, sounds familiar, alright! Unfortunately, though, the rhythm is neither as memorable nor consistent as the fun song, or Thank God It's Monday, which is why I truly find it mind-boggling that they kept this number over that one. But if you look at the deleted scenes and see the original scratch track for the song, sung by this uncredited woman who has a really beautiful singing voice, it sounds a lot more appealing. Plus it contains more lyrics, including an inspired bit involving complex mathematics.
Well, what times the mass of the quantum space plus the ratio of matter in the ocean base divided by 5. Carry the 1, then time does not exist.
So if that's the way it was pitched, I can totally understand why they wanted to put it in the film. But this hilarious set of jokes you could only accomplish in cartoons more than makes up for it.
Hold that thought.
Not only is it great to see 2D animation back on the big screen, but it's also really refreshing to see something so unabashedly cartoony there too. As great as computer animation is, you can't really get away with that kind of gag in it. There's this sketchy, on-the-fly charm to jokes like this one, and it's hard to explain why it works so well. Though I don't typically like to call an animated film a cartoon, please understand that I'm not being hypocritical when I label this movie a full-length cartoon. And I mean that in a good way. So in order to power their time machine, yeah, they're making a time machine now, SpongeBob and Plankton set out to rescue Karen so she can power it. As they try not to wake a familiar sleeping guard, I'm reminded of a certain sequence from the classic episode The Secret Box. SpongeBob then desperately tries not to awake a sleeping Patrick. The detail in this animation is just great, by the way. So now we arrive at what is my favorite portion of the entire film, the time travel sequence. And that's not just because I admittedly have a bias to time travel storylines, it's thanks to its on-point execution. The hallucinatory images of SpongeBob and Plankton actually make fantastic use of the 3D, and each attempt to retrieve the formula is funny and fast enough to not wear out its welcome. In fact, if you took out this sequence alone, though it wouldn't have context, it'd be a hilarious little episode.
Oh, what year is this?
It's Thursday.
This odd, trippy animation of SpongeBob and Plankton coming up close to this screen in really heavily stylized forms while Pharrell's Squeeze Me plays in the background. And let me tell you, when I heard that Pharrell made a song called Squeeze Me for the new SpongeBob movie, I was kind of like, oh god. As much as I really like Pharrell and was aware that he was a SpongeBob fan, I thought that was going to be pretty cringeworthy. But the way they use that song in this part of the film makes it totally great. Just every time they go to time travel, it starts up, yeah, here we go now, yeah. Now it's probably a good time to mention the other two Pharrell songs in this film, being Patrick Starr and Sandy Squirrel. Something you may immediately notice about the Sandy Squirrel song is the fact that it's called Sandy Squirrel, despite the fact that the character is named Sandy Cheeks. This is a mistake that they've made in the actual show once before, which was really embarrassing, but how could they make it in the feature film when you have a song being sung by someone who's apparently a fan of the show? What was going on there, Pharrell? I'm not happy that you did this. I'm not clapping along like a room without a roof. But even so, the song isn't really appealing to me otherwise. However, Patrick Starr, I think, is my favorite song out of the three that he made. It just perfectly summarizes the nonsensical, goofy nature of Patrick Starr. Although there's one lyric that I can't make out. Maybe someone in the comments can help me with this one. What did he say? Say what over who? I'd like some tofu. The cows, they go moo. She's caught in the moose. Someone's in the loo. Someone's over you. So what's in my shoe? Safe hut and igloo. Someone's into you. Oh, well, thanks, Pharrell, for the tip. Now, I don't know who came up with this dolphin character, and I don't know who came up with the idea to call him Bubbles, and who came up with the idea for him to have a speech impediment and be animated with stop motion, and say the line, "What happened to Saturn and to Jupiter?" But whoever did earns a great deal of respect from me. Here I thought that they'd never top the ending of I Had an Accident in terms of utter surrealism. But this right here is the Salvador Dali of the SpongeBob SquarePants canon. And no, I don't think the time travel scenes featuring an all-seeing, laser-shooting, stuttering dolphin are funny because I love all random humor by default. In fact, I seem to be less inclined to it than most people simply because I'll take something witty, clever, and well thought out over something that's meant to be funny because it was clearly thought of on the spot. Random humor can be integrated quite effectively because it tends to work best when you least expect it. That's why shows that are seemingly built on random humor, Teen Titans Go, Uncle Grandpa, etc., feel really kinda stale. Because at a certain point there's only so much ridiculous imagery you can throw up on the screen before it stops sticking. My eyes start to glaze over as I gradually realize that this is by no means a story, just a mismatch of intentionally unrelated pictures going at so fast a pace they hope that I don't process what is going on and laugh as a defense mechanism. But I have to applaud the way they incorporate random humor here. I doubt I have to remind you that the original series also utilized it, a favorite example of mine being the light-flickering live-action stock footage Nosferatu who inexplicably appears at the end of the graveyard shift to resolve a plot point. Why is this so funny? Because they've established a somewhat legitimate narrative you're invested in that they can juxtapose this random joke with. That's why I find the time travel sequence hilarious.
If you're from the future, what am I gonna say next?
Something moronic?
By the end of this sequence, Plankton and SpongeBob appear to have successfully retrieved the formula, though you'll most likely immediately recall that in the beginning of the film, Plankton made a decoy formula that's had no purpose so far, and that they must have taken the wrong bottle. But before we can reach that inevitable payoff, we are treated to more seagulls and bathroom-related humor. The seagulls are pleased by the ending of the story, but Burger Beer darkly claims that this isn't the end. Is it to make the ending even happier, as the seagulls speculate? No, it's purely because we're only at the 45-minute mark, and we don't qualify as a feature yet, even with you guys doing your darndest to contribute your filler. But at least now we've reached the aforementioned moment that Burger Beard finally sends the seagulls away. Why does he do this?
Well, I can't have you pooping all over my restaurant, can I?
Then why did you let them do so all over your pirate ship? How long have you been with them anyway? It's not like he's their master or something. Why do they choose to bother him specifically? And don't say because there's no one else around. Look, they just arrived in this beachside community with tons of extras who have varying acting abilities.
Whoa!
But seem nice enough, going out with Ice Cream Girl. Not only can you see right off the bat that she is physically attractive, but while this ridiculous superhero display is occurring, scaring everyone else away, she just continues licking away at her ice cream. Now that's a girl with priorities, whose selective attentiveness would make her a compelling character, so back at the Krusty Krab. Sandy has determined that a sacrifice is needed to appease the sandwich gods.
Well, that sounds reasonable.
And just then, SpongeBob and Plankton return with the formula, but, it's the wrong one. Shocker. Then, similar to that "were you in my brain" scene, the movie starts acting like a, movie again. Just when the main two characters in the buddy movie start to get close, they have a disagreement that drives them apart again. But like that "were you in my brain" scene, it's done in a way so bizarre that it comes across as hilariously self-aware of the trope it is applying. It's clearly not the kind of movie that's trying to make this silly conflict genuinely sting. It's about as serious as Pee Wee Herman telling Dottie that he's a loner.
You don't want to get mixed up with a guy like me. I'm a loner, Dottie. A rebel.
What I find really interesting, though, is that even though both of those movies clearly aren't trying to have their plotlines taken seriously, they still have those story beats that, in simple terms, make them feel like movies. What defines a movie? In the age of very cinematic, hour-long television shows that follow major dramatic arcs coming to the forefront, I feel like whatever that definition is will continue to be tested, and something that isn't clearly following a thematic structure won't qualify. But despite the fact that SpongeBob offering himself as the sacrifice seems ultimately played for comedy, I actually find it to be a genuinely poignant film moment. Specifically for Plankton's reaction. He's looking out from this crowd that is barbarously chanting for SpongeBob's execution at a SpongeBob who, nonetheless, is dedicated to satisfy whatever these townspeople desire. It not only speaks to SpongeBob's need to help others around him, but I can just see the gears turning in Plankton's head. Why would someone give themselves up for these savages? What exactly once held this society together? But sadly, that's as far as we get. Right after this scene, Plankton goes back to sneaking around, and they're trying to trick you into thinking he's back to his evil ways when he's just going to end up helping the gang in the end. He becomes such a non-entity in the film that they feel the need to very awkwardly remind you that he's still even there.
I ain't been too smart since I found this old piece of paper.
I realize that clip right there I just showed you only took up a few seconds of screen time, but it single-handedly makes me want to deduct an entire point from this film on a scale of 1 to 10. It had no relevance to what was going on. For some reason no one heard or noticed Plankton. And why would he be laughing evilly if his intentions are ultimately good? It's like that moment in Frozen when Hans is completely alone, yet still smiles lovingly at Anna after she leaves. At least with that you could argue he's smiling at the castle he plans to take for himself. Here there is no excuse, so congratulations. You cheated, movie. You cheated.
Mrs. Puff, I think I cheated.
I'll show you a happy ending.
Oh, come on! Why would he, seriously, why would he say that? If he's helping them, he has no reason to say that other than to mislead the audience. Plankton was basically the main character in this movie, and this is what he's reduced to right now? Why are you even trying to make us think he's a bad guy again? We should be past this! But let's back up a bit. I'd be remiss not to mention the best callback to the series in the entire film. For the most part, they seem to have retired that running gag back in season 2, so it was an awesome surprise to hear it again. And apparently it was newly recorded to be of cinema quality. Pretty cool considering that it sounds identical to the original. So, since SpongeBob smells Krabby Patties, everyone traces the scent back to the surface.
Alright, all secondary characters come with me.
Yeah, I'm with you guys.
Now, you might be wondering, wait, if all that brought the cast to the surface was the smell of burgers cooking, what was the point of everything SpongeBob and Plankton did for like the first hour of the movie? Well, other than the fact that Plankton was turned to the good side, even though they try to make you think he wasn't, and they met Bubbles, who grants all the characters the ability to breathe air, there's not much of a point at all, actually. Yeah, did we accidentally just enter the third movie? So, SpongeBob continues to track the scent of Krabby Patties, because I guess that's one of the qualities of being a great fry cook, you know, smelling unauthorized rip-offs of your creation from miles upon miles away, as we get our requisite computer-generated cartoon characters in the real-world gags. And for some of these, I think the term gag is a bit generous.
Whoa!
Most of all this amounts to the characters either A, running around, B, flying around, C, screaming, or D, falling down. There's at least a few funny moments scattered here and there, and I have to say, the nitpicker in me does at least appreciate that they attempted to justify why Sandy didn't just tell them that this guy wasn't a porpoise. Given her Texan background, obviously she would know what a human being looks like. That's never an aspect of her character really touched upon in the film, so they could have tried to just get away with it, but nope, they didn't take the easy way out on this one. I can't say that, though, for most of these gags. Look, they're making a bicycle move by itself. What? Those things don't happen. I'm gonna look bewildered and fall down because not enough characters are falling down in this part of the movie. Really, this stuff could have worked. Look at how memorable something like the traffic cone sequence from Toy Story 2 is. Intersecting with the human world could be both epic and hilarious. But I think the main problem is they're always flying off to the next scene before they get a second to breathe. I mean, Bubbles gave them that ability. How dare they take advantage of it? Like, there's this one scene where everyone ends up in a sandcastle and this kid attacks them. Think of what you could do with that. You could construct this giant, awesome CG interior to the castle and have an epic miniature action scene with humorous cuts back to wide shots of how mundane it all actually is, not unlike something Jedediah and Octavius would be up to in Night at the Museum. It's as if they wanted to place the characters in enough different live-action scenarios so they could create trailers that give the appearance of an entire film above the surface. So eventually the characters actually confront Burger Beard, who, yeah, attempts to explain the mechanic of the magic book, but it's too little explanation too late. He tries to banish our heroes, but SpongeBob rewrites something on that The End page Sandy was looking at from earlier so that they can become superheroes. Wait a minute! How does he have that page? It was huge in the underwater world, and now it fits in her invisible pocket? What, did she make a tiny photocopy of it? Wouldn't it not retain its magical quality then? Oh, forget it. No, not that again, no! Why did you even stow away in the first place? Just so you could miraculously come to save the day when all hope was lost? You were really counting on all hope being lost then, weren't you? What if they defeated the bad guy without your help? That would have been embarrassing. So our heroes finally arrive in those superhero forms that were heavily advertised, sans Sandy for some reason. It's so perplexing, someone whips out their cell phone and snacks a pic, yo. Modern times FTW. Insta that one to your hashtag friends. Okay, I'm done. They manage to hold Burger Beard at bay, but due to SpongeBob's insistence on doing hands in the middle, Burger Beard manages to escape. At this point, we discover that Sandy has turned into a giant CG squirrel. While Sandy becoming a realistic squirrel is a gag they've done on the show before, and something they originally wanted to do in the live-action scenes from the first movie, this is kind of strangely executed. SpongeBob wished for them to be superheroes. In what world is a humongous squirrel a superhero? I suppose it can be intimidating. I mean, if I saw that in real life, I would probably run away. But she didn't get any superpowers. Just saying, I'd feel gypped if I was her. And going back to how Plankton would have been embarrassed if the antagonist was defeated without him, they had Burger Beard trapped before Sandy even showed up. So he almost got embarrassed for being straight up useless herself. And also, Squidward rides around on her and And I'm not sure how I feel about that. It kind of makes me uncomfortable. Even though, as I said earlier, this segment only goes on for about 15 minutes. It feels drawn out compared to the zippy pacing of the rest of the film. You could easily cut it down, since the only thing accomplished before Plankton shows up is that the book with confusingly ambiguous magic powers gets burned. All the characters in their superhero forms having teamed up end up proving ineffective and failing due to what they've inherently become sound from. It's a shame that the part of the movie you feel most inclined to hit the fast forward button on is the one that was the most difficult to create. These live action scenes were shot in Savannah, Georgia, and actually caused a lot of problems for the city. Though the location specialist initially claimed the film would greatly benefit the community's economy, a series of events was set into motion that, honestly, would probably be an interesting idea for a film all on their own. Production was interrupted when a man was fired for his failure to properly plan and manage the arrangement for the film, as complaints arose from local residents. However, don't quote me on this, but it seems like that man might have actually had noble intentions, since he was trying to negotiate a deal to be compensated on a daily basis for potential business losses. The city seemed mixed as to whether or not the film was drawing in or pushing out business, as there was a lot of trouble that went into converting and recoloring various establishments. They even converted a landmark theater into a museum. All those changes were temporary though. But worst of all, a film crew member caused an accident that landed a woman in the hospital and damaged a building. Thankfully, the woman ended up being okay and was released a day later. Unfortunately though, the owner of the building, which was a restaurant, had only just got started a few months prior. As it turned out, the filming permit did not extend to the lanes like they thought. Once filming completed, they held a raffle for the city with the mayor announcing prizes, but the overall reaction from the townsfolk still seemed mixed. People whose businesses were disrupted by all this probably didn't want to win a SpongeBob SquarePants themed party. Yeah, that was one of the prizes offered. I can just imagine this forced, awkward raffle taking place. It sounds like a riot waiting to happen. Why didn't you hear about this? Well, they filmed the live action scenes way back in late 2013, so unless you were going out of your way to track the production of this film, it was over a year from release and probably wouldn't have made as big of a headline. Though this doesn't affect the quality of these scenes, it certainly doesn't help that I know a great deal of people were inconvenienced to make them happen. Now where was I? Oh yeah, the big CG squirrel is shooting nuts like she's a gun at the pirate guy, but then she runs out of nuts, so she says nuts, and... Clearly worth the sacrifice here, guys. Anyway, they defeat Burger Beard by working as a team or whatever. Burger Beard attempts to team up with Plankton, which is very brief and unnecessary, and Plankton hands the formula back to Mr. Krabs. This moment could have had more weight if we built up their relationship a bit more by integrating Plankton into the entire live-action portion with the rest of the cast, but as is, it's fine. SpongeBob writes for everything to go back to normal, and so it does. Then we get that rap battle. Okay, let's dive into that.
Are you ready, kids?
Aye, aye, Captain!
I feel like the rap battle is the biggest make it or break it sequence in the film. If you like this sequence, then you liked the movie. If you didn't like it, you probably didn't like the movie overall. And now, if you told me in advance that the new SpongeBob movie would end with a rap battle, I would have screamed in agony as I died on the floor in front of you. SpongeBob selling out, some modern take, they're making it all hip, doing the rap battle at the end. What is that? But to be honest, it's just another non sequitur in a film that is a series of non sequiturs. I found it so crazy that I was along for the ride. I laughed. They even have like a little part when they have like a censored curse and there's a dolphin noise and it's like a callback to Sailor Mouth. Like that made me happy. But just even without that, I thought the sequence was so strange and also just self-aware that, like, you know, oh, you're making the movie too long, Painty the Pirate says. Which, I mean, just because you're being aware of the fact that you're dragging out the film doesn't make it funny. But something about the utterly chaotic nature of this scene in which you set it up so that you have the main pirate character of the film turn into the painted pirate that opens every SpongeBob episode, which is a clever idea, but then it's interrupted by the dolphin, and then they get into a rap battle. Like, what is going on? But I'm engaged because they just keep throwing things at me. And I think what I really appreciate about it most is how it just abruptly cuts from Bubbles the dolphin being like, that was pretty good actually, to just credits. That's it. That's the movie. Boom. Done. There's just something so bold and confident about that the movie is just totally aware of what it is. I just can't help but appreciate it. But remember how SpongeBob wrote for everything to go back to normal? Unfortunately, this also means that Plankton is back to trying to steal the formula once again. You might expect me to be upset that the film just hit the reset button and denied any lasting impact on the characters. Surprisingly, I don't feel that way though. To make Plankton a good guy would overwrite the ending of the original film, and surely if the series was to continue, it wouldn't follow up on that character development, would it? This just confirms that the original film takes place last, and to me, beyond that, it actually presents an interesting message. No, not the one about teamwork that they throw in there just to trick parents into thinking this movie has a positive lesson. As I alluded to earlier, it's about maintaining normalcy, no matter how crazy or arguably wrong that normalcy may be. Wait a minute. Returning things to normal. You have a guy put in charge of an operation who, due to poor planning, fails and is ostracized, while a setting is changed drastically, only for it to ultimately be reverted to its original state upon completion of the initial task. The plot is a metaphor to the production of the live-action scenes. No, but in all seriousness, the disputability about whether or not putting Plankton back into his original role was good or bad is part of what makes it so interesting. Everything they set out to do in the film was to return things back to normal, and that's exactly what they did.
We'll find the secret formula and everything will go back to the way it was. Hey, I'm just putting things back the way they were.
Is it worth it to never change if we're able to maintain what we know? Or, as the first movie suggests, do we eventually have to grow up a little? I want SpongeBob to be good again, I do. And according to box office returns and the positive critical reception, all signs point to that it is. In fact, something that I think is important to address is why this movie made so much more than the first one. Both were box office hits, especially compared to their relatively small budgets, but this one made over twice as much. Does this mean it's objectively a much better movie for a wide audience and what they should emulate for the third film that's currently in the works? That the heavily marketed CG angle is what gets people in the seats compared to boring old 2D? Well, the first film came out in November. Did you notice how they released Sponge Out of Water in February, the same month that just a year prior there was another animated film released that was based on a franchise about a yellow guy with a square head that featured zippy, albeit tangential pacing that made it feel like it was being told to us by a kid at playtime? A movie that you thought was gonna be pretty bad but actually had surprisingly pretty good critical reception? The Lego Movie. When that movie came out, I actually noticed a lot of similarities between it and the original SpongeBob movie. Hero's journey structure, live action elements, mostly in the third act, an optimistic protagonist, and so on. What movies come out in February, and don't family-oriented films often do very well at the box office nowadays, especially when there's no competition? And look at how well both Sponge Out of Water and the Lego Movie did. Both already have sequels in the pipeline, and they did pretty well critically, too. What did the 2004 film have to compete with? The Incredibles, National Treasure, The Polar Express, and Christmas with the Cranks. But you know, Christmas movies tend to get a lot of attention by default, so in my books it went up against one classic, one surprisingly very entertaining film, one film I have a lot of mixed feelings about, but certainly had a lot of hype surrounding it, and it's put on every year because it's a Christmas film, and that other Christmas film... Let's take a look at the 2015 films competition. American Sniper. Okay, now that was an Oscar contender that actually made a lot of money for your average Best Picture nominee. What else? Let's see here. Jupiter Ascending. Seventh Son. Project Almanac. What's something that you notice here? None of these, including the successful American Sniper, are anything a kid would ever want to see at all. In fact, all of them other than American Sniper are films no one ever wanted to see at all. The kid-friendly Paddington had its US release around this time, yes, but it was criminally overlooked by moviegoers, as you'd probably expect for a movie not American in origin based on a property that isn't all that well known in the States with a delayed release date and a publicized main actor change that led many to question the film's quality. And all of the movies I mentioned for 2004 were something families could go to. Even Christmas with Cranks. If you don't believe me, I, as a kid, had the misfortune of seeing it in theaters. It was PG and had Tim Allen in it, I like Tim Allen. And even in the next few weeks for Sponge Out of Water, you had successful films at the box office like Kingsman: The Secret Service, which I love, 50 Shades of Grey, which, oh my, and Hot Tub Time Machine 2. Oh wait, I said successful. Forget that last one. You still aren't taking your child to see any of these. I don't know, maybe you're taking them to 50 Shades of Grey, but if that's the case, you're 50 Shades of a bad parent. It wasn't until a full month later that Cinderella came out and families had another option. And the next animated film wasn't until another 2 weeks later. And it was Home! Lilo and Stitch starring Selden and Rihanna. I'm just saying, there wasn't much in the way of competition. The original release date for this film was actually 2014, rumored to be November, which would have been nicely in sync with the 10th anniversary of the first film's release. And it would have gone straight up against Big Hero 6, an animated movie aimed at families that also was pushing the superhero angle hard, but was actually about superheroes and had stronger critical reception. Wise move there, not putting it out at the same time as Big Hero 6. Wise move there. Plus, SpongeBob now has actually become a nostalgic property. It was a touchstone of our generation, something we universally exchanged quotes and laughs over. If I walk into my classroom and mimic an old lady yelling, "What? What are they selling?" someone is going to reply, "They're selling chocolates!" It's even more valuable than I think studios realized before the release of the second film. So overall, how does this movie compare to the first one? Well, something an avid fan of the series can easily point to is the fact that this new film utilizes the show's characters far more. Despite being very significant to the plot, Mr. Krabs was frozen for the majority of the first film. Squidward was relegated to a supporting role, and Sandy was barely in it at all. Also, I didn't notice this growing up, but even though Plankton is the main antagonist of the film, there are large chunks where he doesn't even appear, since he too remains in Bikini Bottom the entire time. All of these characters get more significant appearances here, even Gary gets a larger amount of screen time. But just because the movie has more characters from the show doesn't mean it represents the show better. Think about it. How often do you even see all of these characters in the same episode? Surprisingly, very rarely, and even less frequent are the times that the main cast all works towards one common goal in the episode. How often does that happen? Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5? Band Geeks? They all go to the party in Party Pooper Pants. They also throw that brief party in Nature Pants. As far as seasons 1 through 3 goes anyway, that's about it. And that's out of 117 episodes. Is the soundtrack close to the quality of the original, though? No, not at all. Every song that played over that first film's credits was absolutely fantastic, because I believe Hillenburg wanted to make sure that the songs didn't sound like they were made for kids' films. And even the best song that plays over the second film's credits does admittedly sound like it was made for children. Despite this movie's live-action element being more prominent, it can't top the most clever aspect of the originals, the much-anticipated Cell City being just a gift shop, or the funniest aspect, David Hasselhoff's cameo, of course. Actually, in my opinion, the funniest scene in the live-action segments was deleted from this film, and you can't even find it in the deleted scenes on the Blu-ray. You gotta check the iTunes extras. It's about Patrick's uncle. He'll thank me later. I do really think that the live-action scenes could have worked, though. The biggest mistake made here is that the film abruptly abandons the SpongeBob and Plankton dynamic that's sort of become the heart of the movie. Without that, it's as if we entered another film entirely, both dimensionally and thematically. Why not make Plankton have to work together with the rest of the crew? Create conflict from there, not light disagreements about Patrick wanting feet and such. Plus, you can add an emotional component to the otherwise wholly slapstick nature of the live action. Use it as an illustration of Plankton's perspective, how his size makes his life feel futile, and the other characters only begin to realize as they're thrown about in this strange, huge world that rejects them. Every time a character falls, there's both a sense of antics, but also a sad truth of that walk of life that Plankton leads. Instead, we just get an underwhelming Plankton speech. Plankton's basically the main character in this film. Yes, I realize I'm saying that about a movie that has Sponge in the title twice, but he has the biggest arc, come on. SpongeBob doesn't learn anything, really. So I think it's fair to compare this moment with the I Rode the Hasselhoff speech from the original. And which do you think is more emotionally charged? Take a listen.
I guess you're right, Plankton. I am just a kid.
Of course I'm right. Okay, Neptune, time to kill.
And you know, I've been through a lot in the past 6 days, 5 minutes, 27.5 seconds. And if I've learned anything during that time, it's that you are who you are.
That's right. Okay, Neptune.
And no amount of mermaid magic, or managerial promotion, or some other third thing can make me anything more than what I really am inside. A kid.
That's great. Now get back against the wall.
But that's okay!
What? What's going on?
'Cause I did what everyone said a kid couldn't do. I made it to Shell City, and I beat the Cyclops, and I rode the Hasselhoff, and I brought the crown back!
All right, we get the point.
So yeah, I'm a kid, and I'm also a goofball, and a wingnut, and a knucklehead McSpagatron!
What's going on here?
But most of all, I'm...
Hey, settle down. Take it easy. What the scallop?
I'm a goofy goober!
No, That's the old me. The one who turned his back on everything important just to have that formula all to himself. But I realize now that keeping something to myself is selfish.
The structure of this movie was actually based on Midnight Run, which is a buddy movie, except instead of Robert De Niro and Charles Grodin, it's SpongeBob and Plankton. It was even literally intended for them to be handcuffed together in the movie, although that morphed and changed. Well, apparently, what also morphed and changed was that at a certain point they decided to make a buddy movie where the buddies mostly stop interacting for the last act of the film. Sure, you could say Patrick was a little irrelevant at the end of the first movie, but you don't really notice since he wasn't crucial to setting that story in motion, and therefore doesn't need to have much to do when it gets tied up.
Plankton, on the other hand, was anything but irrelevant in the beginning of this movie.
In fact, speaking of irrelevance, I wouldn't go so far as to say any character has that big a role aside from SpongeBob, Plankton, and maybe Mr. Krabs. Yes, they're all around in the last half hour, but they essentially feel like glorified set dressing. Aside from occasional moments when they genuinely shine, like I think SpongeBob letting Squidward keep his rock-hard abs as an inspired bit, they're not really characters in the movie so much as fodder to go insane and later get thrown around and then take on silly superhero roles that we could put in the trailer. So yes, the first movie is superior in my eyes in how it moved the characters forward, had an emotional story, and contained some amazing songs. The second movie has its moments. Yes, it can be a byproduct of the time period and how it emulates the Smurfian structure, TM. It avoids being a serious movie as often as possible, and even had a troubled production history. But I marvel at its quick wit and the sheer amount of visual styles it employs. And given the regard I hold great SpongeBob material in, I can't just ignore the moments it has. I realize it's become cliché at this point to say that post-movie episodes aren't as good, with occasional exceptions.
Like Krabs vs. Plankton, Friend or Foe, Hello Bikini Bottom, It's a SpongeBob Christmas, the list goes on.
But from when I first saw the premiere of Season 4 on Nick back in, 2005, I knew right away that something felt off, especially once we got to Funny Pants and Good Neighbors. The show felt oddly broader, slower paced, oversimplified, annoying, and too in-your-face and exaggerated in how it handled its comedy.
Well, SpongeBob, what do you think of my new nose?
Patrick, that's not a nose, that's a...
Like, something I don't think anyone's pointed out that I picked up on right away is those Season 4 episodes started putting this little musical sting in every episode. It's like emphasizing the punchline of jokes. It goes like this.
The fork!
Like, what? We told a joke.
Well, I guess I won't be eating those.
I heard that.
I'm not hitting it! He's hitting it!
The classic episodes were effortlessly hilarious, packed with jokes that allowed the premises to live up to their potential, and had likable characters to boot. It's a delicate magic. I'm not sure if there's any series from my early childhood I hold in as high a regard for shaping my sense of humor. So to see some of the magic back, well, it had me smiling in the theater. I went to see it twice even. Is it objectively a good movie as it stands with all its flaws on the table? Well, it depends on what you're willing to overlook in your final rating. To me, there's a highly enjoyable movie there. It just for the most part ends a little before the movie it's placed within ends. Or maybe my nostalgia goggles are just on too tight. I don't know. I better go clean up all those props I threw around in the beginning of the video.
You know, this is actually the alarm clock that woke me up on my very first day of elementary school. Jeez. Wonder if it still works.
That just made me realize, these nostalgia goggles aren't on too tight. I'm not saying I only like the old episodes better because I grew up on them. Like I pointed out, I was still quite young when I noticed the show going bad. But when you revisit experiences from childhood, they're always going to be a little distorted. Kind of like my fun alarm clock, which was actually really distorted. You can't have that feeling back completely. Your view of the world has expanded. I'm hard-pressed to find something that better describes this than a song from the credits of the first movie. SpongeBob and Patrick confront the psychic wall of energy. There are these beautiful lyrics that go, maybe we're just young and we won't know till we're old. Too young to free ourselves from this lonely fistbowl. Some kind of wall. Some kind of psychic wall. I loved this song when I was a kid, but I have a whole new level of appreciation for it now. That's the truth. We as children are basically sheltered in an enclosed ecosystem with a limited understanding beyond what we need to know at that time. Status quo, rinse and repeat. What did the fish in the bowl need? Just food, really. Like the fish characters who need the Krabby Patties in the film. It's never going to be like when you were a kid again. Sometimes these things are even distorted beyond repair. The fish bowl looks a lot different from the other side, but if I'm able to look at it and at least momentarily forget that I'm looking at a bowl, a simulation of life that I'm now beyond, and just fully buy into that old mentality, like the crust of a tan man imbibed by the sand, it's as if the sequence of a life form braised in the sand has been reversed. Or to put it in terms that aren't lyrics to Ocean Man, a movie can still leave an impact even if it has overt child-pandering moments that taint its overall status and reputation. Like they said in that Flaming Lips song, to be thought of as a king, you don't need a crown. There's this really memorable portion from the introduction to this movie guide by Leonard Moulton I have. It talks about how to assess a movie. It reads, "Therein lies the conundrum. How is one to assess a movie? I still choose to see films, both new and old, on a theater screen whenever I can. Like millions of other people, I also watch them on DVD, cable, and satellite television. I discovered the enormous difference in one's reaction to, and perception of, a movie based on these circumstances many years ago, and I've written about that before in these pages. Even so, I am continually reminded of the disparity. Not long ago, I visited someone in the hospital, and along with him got involved in a movie I'd seen before that was playing on TV. It was interrupted by commercials and snipped to save time and avoid four-letter words, but it entertained us both and helped to pass the time. I know I was much more judgmental when I saw the film in a theater, flushed with anticipation on the eve of its release. Does that mean one should cut every movie some slack because eventually it will become fodder for a less demanding and more grateful audience down the road than the one that greets it on its theatrical debut? Or, to go to the other extreme, that a film can't be properly judged until it's been digested over and over again on a home screen? Of course not. I believe that some standards should be maintained, and the movie as it first appears in theaters, the one that demands $10 or more to be seen, should be held accountable to a commonly accepted measurement of quality. And to be perfectly honest, when I first saw this movie in theaters, most of these complaints I've been mentioning throughout this review didn't even register in my head. It was one of those movies when I walked out with a huge grin on my face. So yeah, it's for kids, and it's also just goofy, and a knucklehead McSpazatron! But most of all, it's still a good movie!